Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me is Omar Pozos, my co-host and husband. How are you doing, Omar?
I'm doing good. I'm excited. This is the week of Christmas, right? When this episode's gonna come out. Oh yeah. So
Ooh, Merry Christmas.
I'm laughing because we tried to re-record this, and my brain is just in a mumble jumble today. But yes, I'm excited. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm with you on like the mumble jumble brain. So, and for our listeners, we just did a mold test kit in our house because I'm suspecting there might be a little bit of a mold problem. And now because I'm suspecting that, I feel like I'm creating the symptoms within myself. So I'm also like, gosh, I feel really brain foggy today. And now you're like, man, I feel mumble jumbled. I'm like, it's the mold.
Well, I'm just mumble jumbled because I just didn't know what to say. I was like, Mary Chrysler, I just didn't know what to say.
Well, today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about eating for hormone health. This is a question I get all the time in the DMs, something along the lines of like, how should I eat for my hormones? Like, what should I eat? Just tell me what to eat. Tell me how to eat. That is what everybody wants to know, right? And I love that people are asking about this. I love that this is something that is really just becoming a more popular topic right now, because I know this hasn't always been a popular topic. And I even think of just like how much our culture has shifted and adjusted in recent years. Like thinking back to, gosh, if you go back to like the 90s when it was the low fat craze. And
were you even born in the 90s? Yeah, you were born in the 90s. Were you around in the 90s?
Yes, I was around in the 90s. Thank you. But in the 90s, I think back to like the low fat craze. I think I had told you, Omar, how like I very much grew up in a household of like low fat milk. Like I had never even tasted full fat milk until I was, too old to understand the difference between them. And then you think about like early 2000s, I think of very much like the low carb craze, like the Atkins diet being super popular and things like that. Then, even progressing.
What was the South? Like South Beach something?
Yeah, I don't really remember exactly what was entailed in that, to be honest with you. I just remember like the South Beach bars themselves because it was so tasty. This is a great diet. And then you just think of like even more recent years, like later 2000s, it just became, I feel like, back to just overall low calories. It was no longer like demonizing carbs versus fats, although there's still the keto zealots for sure. But I feel like just in general, it started to very much become like with all the tracking apps and all the things that have just like been booming. I feel like everybody's now very aware of calories and just like, let me just eat as little as possible. Let me, take appetite suppressants and just eat as little as possible. And obviously we've talked a lot about how that negatively affects our metabolism, our hormones, and how all of these things ultimately don't set you up well. And no surprise now that so many women, especially you think of like women who are getting closer to perimenopause, even I say closer to perimenopause, which for most women is early 50s, but even women in late 30s really starting to get into early menopause. And I really think a lot of it comes down to really poor dietary habits over the years. And so without going on a complete tangent here, what I really want to take some time on this episode is for all the women out there who are, running on caffeine and stress and just feel like I don't even know what to eat for my hormones these days. I just don't even know what to do. I want to simplify eating for healthy hormones on this episode for you. So we're just going to dive into 3 simple nutrition tips to help support your hormone health.
Let's do it. Let's dive on in.
So really going back to basics here with these 3 tips, we really want to eat, a well-rounded, really just nourishing diet within our just nutrition. I always say the word diet, and then sometimes I catch myself of like, I don't even like to use that word because it has such like a negative connotation of dieting inherently for a lot of people feels like restriction. But when I say diet, I always like the acronym of did I eat today? Really, when we're talking when we're talking about a diet, we're just talking about what it is that you're eating. And I know that a lot of women out there, especially this time of year, like we're all busy, stressed, just run down, running around to the max. And we're probably not putting our nutrition at the forefront. We probably are under eating. We probably are over caffeinating. We probably are overstressed. Our blood sugar is probably all over the place. And so I hope that of these 3 tips, there's something here that you can walk away with, that even during busy times like this, you can start to focus on these things. So number one, a kind of a rule for eating for hormone balancing is to eat a diet made up of overall whole foods. So minimal ingredients, minimal processing, really just want foods to be as close to their natural form as possible. If your diet is mostly made up of nutrient-dense whole foods, you're going to be in a really great spot, and you are going to be a huge step ahead of a lot of our culture. With this, we also need to make sure that we're eating enough. We need to make sure that we're not...
That's a big one.
Yeah, that we're not just focusing on eating these like more nutrient-dense foods, but then like still feeling like crap, because oftentimes these foods are also more filling, right? If we're eating a lot of very whole foods when we're used to eating more processed foods, you're going to feel fuller faster because they are more filling and more satiating.
Can I throw something in there?
Of course.
If in a lot of our listeners, when somebody like gets on a quick call with us and we're trying to understand a little bit more about their lifestyle and what it is that they're trying to achieve. And if you do get on a call with me, you'll probably know, but I like to ask a ton of questions just to get super crystal clear to feel really confident that we can help people solve the problem they have. But my favorite question is diving into the nutrition aspect. And what I see a lot, to your point of like, let's make sure we're eating enough. People are like, you know what, Omar, like I eat very, very healthy, like no seed oils, nothing processed, a lot of whole nutrient rich foods. I'm like, that's amazing. I'm like, great job. That's a really good start. I'm like, if you don't mind me asking, like, let's dive into a little bit more nutrition. And I get this so often and I want to reiterate this, but I'm like, okay, so like, what does breakfast normally look like? And sometimes it'll be like noon or 1 p.m. and they're like, well, I haven't had breakfast yet. Or, today I only had a protein shake and a granola bar. But for the most part, I do XYZ thing, right? So I think just taking the time to reiterate that and just being honest with yourself, being like, for the most part or 50% of the time, unfortunately, your body doesn't know the difference between you being busy and you starving. And so that's something that I think in addition to eating that minimal ingredient, whole nutrient-rich foods, it's making sure you're getting plenty of those nutrients so that your body can perform and do the things that it needs to do. Does that make sense?
100%. Absolutely. It's, along with this kind of like number one rule of focusing on eating very nutrient-dense whole foods, think, vegetables, fruits, meats, nuts, seeds, fish, even like, oils like olive oil, coconut oil, nut butters, nuts, like those types of things. If you are focusing your just overall kind of diet around those types of foods, like that is the bulk of what you're eating, then that's like a huge check mark. But on top of that, if, you could say like, well, that's all I'm eating are those types of foods. But then if the amount that you're eating in total is very little, you're still not really helping yourself there. Right. So almost to keep things really simple, and these next two kind of things that we're going to talk about are also going to help with this, but just kind of going along with number one with making sure we're eating enough of the nutrient-dense whole foods, aim to be eating at least 3 meals per day. The amount of meals that you eat is going to depend on kind of the person and a lot of circumstances and a lot of factors. That's something, we can always help our clients figure out what's going to be optimal in terms of the amount of meals per day, but minimum 3 meals per day. Absolutely. Now, number 2 on the list is avoiding eating naked carbs. What are naked carbs? Essentially, naked carbs are just eating carbs on their own. And when I'm talking about carbs, really I'm mainly pointing the finger at like very simple carbohydrates, because technically, a lot of fruits and vegetables, those are also carbohydrates. However, a lot of those we would almost put more into the bucket of like a fiber source when we're thinking about building on our plate. So when I'm talking about carbs here, I'm really more so referring to, the starchy carbs, the simple carbs, the, rice, bread, oats, all the different things. My brain is having trouble coming up with certain examples right now.
I want to make the joke. I'm like, it's the mold, but I don't want to freak you out, so I'm not going to do it.
Wait until we at least get our test results back before I just, freak out or anything like that. But when it comes to carbs, we never want to have them alone because, and we've talked about this on our blood sugar regulation type of podcast as well, balancing blood sugar. So go back and listen to that. But ultimately, if we eat carbs alone, it's going to spike our blood sugar really fast. If we spike our blood sugar fast, that does have a direct relationship with cortisol. So you're also going to have a jump up in cortisol. You also are going to put yourself on the path towards insulin resistance if you're doing this often. And both of those two issues of insulin resistance and high cortisol, you're going to find yourself really throwing your hormones out of whack. So that's part of why it's so important to make sure that we don't eat those carbs alone. Now, very, very careful to distinguish here. I'm not saying don't eat those carbs. We need the carbs too. We absolutely need the carbs. Carbs break down into glucose, which is your body's preferred energy source. There might be a time and a place to drop our carbs, to use tactics like carb cycling and things like that. But as a whole, to eat for balanced hormones, to eat in a way that's nourishing our bodies, we need carbohydrates. We love carbohydrates. So let's eat the carbs. Do not be afraid of them. They are very, very important to your overall health.
Specifically, even to, I know we get a lot of the ladies that we talk to are, PCOS, insulin resistant, or are pre-diabetic or have those high glucose levels. I think a lot of people demonize carbs to the point, like you said, where they're like, well, if that's what's spiking my blood sugar, like now I can't, do all these things. And then we start to see the low energy and all these things. And they're like, well, what do I do? How do I fix this? Right. So to your point, yeah, I think it's super important to remind people, like you don't have to cut out carbs. You just have to be able to, like you said, I was laughing earlier because when you said eating naked carbs, and I think we've said this before, but I'm like, it doesn't mean you're eating carbs naked. You just don't eat the carbs alone.
Yes.
That's my 5-year-old child.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Don't eat your carbs naked.
So essentially just you want to pair carbs with at least a protein or a fat, if not having all three present on your plate at the same time. But when it comes to snacks, this is where I see it happen more often, is when it comes to snacks. And I know, like, even I think of to my early days when I was like, yeah, I'm a health nut. Here I am, like, drinking my green juice.
Said, babe? Yeah, I'm a health nut.
Yeah, just like that. And I, have my juice, but now I'm just having straight juice. I'm just sending myself on a blood sugar roller coaster. Or, here I'm having a banana. Like, I remember I would say, like, oh, if I don't have an apple or banana as my snack, I just am like, that's like makes up my day. But the reality was I was eating those alone. I wasn't even pairing it with like a nut butter or something, giving myself a fat source. So anytime we eat a carbohydrate, it always should be paired with a fat and or a protein, ideally all three if we're building out a meal, not a snack. But that's going to really help make sure that the carbs digest more slowly and it gets a little bit more of like a steady release into the bloodstream. So we don't have that big sugar spike and crash that can lead to a host of issues. Now, number 3, our last little kind of tip here for eating for balanced hormones is eating 20 to 40 grams of protein at every meal. This one is one that I think women specifically, we tend to struggle with.
Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of women are like not really big meat eaters.
Okay.
And, maybe they might have like dinner. They have a good meat source, but they might maybe like, you talk about maybe they're skipping breakfast and then maybe lunch, just kind of like something small. And maybe they think like, oh yeah, there's some chicken on my salad, but it's like a really small amount of chicken realistically. And then they don't really have anything until dinner time and they might have a good serving of like a meat source, but they might also be like, I'm not like really a huge meat eater. So they don't eat a ton of it. And if you look over the course of the day, their total amount of protein, it's not enough for their bodies. And this is a huge problem that leads to a lot of issues in our bodies. One of them being that our hormones do need amino acids. It is a building block in the process of overall creating and detoxing hormones through the body. So if we're not eating sufficient protein, not only are we going to, be setting ourselves up to lose muscle mass, have trouble putting on muscle mass, slow down our metabolism. It's important for neurotransmitters. It's important for, our hair, our skin, all these different types of things like nails. A lot of that can come back to our protein intake for sure. So very, very important.
One quick just perspective, because I get this too a lot when I talk to a lot of the ladies, is they're like, well, I had 2 eggs for breakfast, so that's enough protein. I literally just looked this up, but 1 egg is 6 grams of protein.
You didn't know that off the top of your head?
I knew it was between 6 and 9, but I didn't want to sound like an idiot, so I looked it up instead. Listen, I'm just being honest with the listeners.
No, I think it's funny.
Did you know that off the top of your head? 100%.
100%, yeah.
Okay, all right.
I feel like eggs is an easy one.
All right. I guess I'm
just calling you out here. I just like to make fun of you. But that's again like a great example there. Eggs, a lot of times if someone is saying like, oh yeah, I eat 2 eggs for breakfast, but like you said, that's 12
How many grams of protein would that be?
12.
Oh wow.
Look at me, I can do math. Wow, 6 plus 6. I know math. I do math. So again, we want to shoot for more of that 20 to 40 gram range, especially like actually at breakfast. A lot of research points to a 35 gram protein breakfast is one of the best things you can do to really go ahead and start that muscle protein synthesis response in the body in the morning after your overnight fast. And I think breakfast, again, that's probably like one of the biggest ones where women are not getting enough protein. So overall, we got to make sure we're giving our body enough food. We're giving our body quality, nutrient-dense food. We got to make sure we're not eating our carbs alone. We got to make sure we're eating enough protein. If you do those 3 things alone, you will absolutely start to feel a difference in your body. And if you're already doing those things and you're feeling stuck, that just means it's time to dive into a lot of the other variables, because there's a ton of variables at play when it comes to our hormone health. We need to be making sure we are managing stress. We need to make sure we're sleeping both enough and quality sleep. We need to make sure that we are moving our bodies appropriately. We need to make sure that our liver is in a great spot. We need to make sure that our gut is in a good spot. We need to make sure that we don't have too much toxin build up in our body. Like, there are so many variables. Mold. We got to make sure we don't got mold in our bodies or in our house. That's where I'm at right now, you guys.
Why are you like whispering into the mic? You're like ASMR.
This is me. Like, I'm cutting you out of the conversation. I'm telling the people, you guys, he doesn't believe me, but I think we have mold. So that's where we're at. But I hope this episode is helpful. You know, your nutrition is probably the number one place that you should be starting when it comes to our hormone health. So really start here. If these 3 things, you don't feel like you are doing these 3 things, or you feel like there's room for improvement here, start there, and you will absolutely start to notice and feel differences in your body.
And don't eat your carbs naked.
Yes. Put some clothes on. That's all for this week, guys. I hope this episode was helpful for you. Hit subscribe if you're not already. Share this with a friend, and we'll be back next week with another
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
All right. Bye, you guys.